Leading Britain's conversation. The Alex Salmond phone-in with Iain Dale at Drive on LBC.
It's Wednesday, it's just gone 4 o'clock, and this is the Alex Salmond phone-in on LBC. This week, in Parliamentary Brexit Week, it's a tale of two manifestos. First, the Tory one on page 27, which the Chancellor intended to break with a tax grab on the self-employed. Now he's on headlong retreat and a humiliating climb down. Second is page 23 of the SNP manifesto, which the First Minister of Scotland intends to keep. If Scotland is dragged out of Europe against her will, there should be another referendum. Will Theresa May try to stop Nicola Sturgeon keeping to her manifesto? And what will be the consequences if she does? Laura Kuenssberg for Chancellor. A bizarre moment in the Commons today as Philip Hammond, in an answer to a question from yours truly, announces that it was the BBC's political editor that alerted him to his broken manifesto pledge. He should be listening to LBC. Iain Dale was onto it in a flash last week, and so the cry goes up. Laura Kuenssberg for Chancellor, Iain Dale for Chief Secretary to the Treasury. But you set the agenda, and you can call it anything you like, within reason, of course. Phone 0345 6060 973 or text 84850 or tweet at LBC or email alec@lbc.co.uk. This is the Alex Salmond phone-in with Iain Dale. LBC, leading Britain's conversation.
I'll tell you what, if Laura Kuenssberg and I were in the Treasury, I would fear for the future of the economy, Alex, to be honest.
No, but it's absolutely true. I mean, I didn't see Laura pouncing on the manifesto, but last week we were here, and even before I got here, hot foot from the budget, you were all over this. So I mean, the Chancellor should get out more. I mean, no point in speaking to these stooky dummies in the cabinet.
Maybe he should even read his own manifesto.
Well, no, but the point is, he went to the budget now is a cabinet collective thing. The Chancellor goes to the cabinet, then goes to the Commons. And what we're now expected to believe, and presumably it must be true, otherwise you wouldn't have had this burach, as we'd call it in Scotland, that nobody, not the Chancellor, not the Prime Minister, not the Cabinet, not any of these well-paid special advisors, not anybody immediately in the Commons. I mean, Stuart Hosey was onto it in a flash. The Tory MPs were looking downcast, but it was only when Laura Kuenssberg and Iain Dale said, wait a minute, that the Chancellor realised you should be being paid money for advice.
I suspect this is the first and last time in this hour that we're going to agree on an awful lot, Alex, because this is the only place where you can talk to someone in the know. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Alex Salmond. This is the man who negotiated with David Cameron's government about the first referendum. What has he learned from that experience? You might want to call in and ask 0345 6060 973. So much going on this week. Alex is going to be here for the whole hour. 0345 6060 973. And we're live on LBC's Facebook page as well. Let's go to Mark in Halstead. Hello, Mark.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Salmond.
On you go, Mark.
Given your wealth of experience and understanding of the political situation in the United Kingdom, were you born and bred south of the border? Would you advocate a devolved English Parliament?
Yes, I would. In fact, I've done it publicly. Obviously I support independence for Scotland, but if you were trying for a form of devolution, if you were, unlike me, wanting to just keep the United Kingdom, then I think the only way you can actually do it is to have an English Parliament, Scottish Parliament, Welsh Parliament and Northern-Irish Assembly, because this arrangement they've got now in the Commons of the Scots MPs being in for some votes, out for other votes, English votes for English MPs is a farce. And everybody knows it's a farce. So I'm for an English Parliament in the sense if I wasn't for independence for Scotland. Once, of course, there's independence for Scotland, then the problem is largely solved, Mark.
Unless you're Welsh or Northern Irish, I suppose.
Well, I suppose you could still argue it. I mean, the problem with federalism, as it's called, has always been, I see that Labour in Scotland, although not Jeremy Corbyn, seem to have moved towards it. It's always been, if you've got England, which is such a large part of there's four nations in the United Kingdom, but England's about 87% or so of the population, maybe slightly more now. And therefore it's very difficult to have a federal arrangement when there's one country which is so much bigger than the other three component parts. But is it?
Because in America, California dominates everything, doesn't it? I mean, not to the same extent, but you know what I mean.
But in America there's more than 50 states. I mean, it's not just four countries. So, I mean, we have other arrangements. I was really fascinated. Somebody was telling me the other day, of course, you'd have to have customs posts if one bit of the country was in the European Union and another bit was out with the European Union. They seem to never have heard of the Isle of Man and Guernsey and Jersey, the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man, which of course are not in the European Union, but there's no passport to get to the Isle of Man because they're in the common travel area of the United Kingdom. So, you could organise things in a variety of ways. But, basically the answer to your question, Mark, is I'm for English self-government.
Well, you're speaking to someone who 14 years ago founded the Conservative campaign for an English Parliament.
Did you?
That's something you didn't know, isn't it?
My goodness.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Get you into the Treasury and then you'll be able to finance the campaign.
Right, let's go on. Payvand is in Twickenham. Hello, Payvand.
Hi there.
Hi, what would you like to ask Alex?
Hello, Mr. Salmond. I just wanted to ask, if Jeremy Corbyn saying that it's okay to have a referendum is fantastic for the SNP, I'm sure you'll agree. If you were Labour leader yourself...
And there's a thought.
If you're an observer of the Labour leader, if you were to step out of your role as an SNP, would you not think that this chap needs to resign for saying such a thing?
No. I'll tell you, there's a number of things that Jeremy Corbyn has done recently that I've traditionally quite friendly, incidentally, to Jeremy Corbyn, but I've been very critical. And today was another example, incidentally, that the goal was open wide, and he didn't even hit the post. Never mind.
He hit it out for a throw-in, really, didn't he?
I know. But listen, when you get attacked by your own party, as he was savagely by the single Labour MP in Scotland, Iain Murray, for actually more or less saying, perhaps not in the language that everybody would have wanted, look, self-determination's okay with me. If a nation wants a referendum, then they're entitled to have it. Now, I wouldn't sack somebody or be against somebody for saying that. I think it's when they say the opposite, they should be criticised. And Corbyn was saying something, he maybe didn't say it as well as some people in the Labour Party would like, but what he's saying is, look, as a Labour Party, we're not in favour of it, but if the Scottish Parliament, a national parliament elected by proportional representation, votes for it, then you've just got to accept it. That's what he meant by it's okay by me. So I wouldn't sack him for that. I think there's many more things you might sack him for, but not with that one.
Payvan, what do you think?
One question. Okay, fair enough. But what now that if you have your referendum, what is going to happen to the 48%? You're leaving us. What about us?
Well, I tell you what I'd have done, Payvan, last election, if I'd been the Labour leader, if I'd been Ed Miliband. And this is where I think he made an absolute cardinal mistake. When the Tories were saying, look, Ed Miliband, if he gets in, then there's going to be Alex Salmond will have him in his pocket. They had me pictured of him at the door of number 10.
Which was true.
Well, I'm not. Well, I don't think it was true at all. But I'm not. Whether it's true or not.
You don't sound very sure.
No, whether it's true or not, his reaction to it was entirely wrong. If a government in the run-up to an election pictures the opposition leader at the door of number 10, what the opposition leader should say is, well, they've conceded the election. They've got me in number 10. Now, we can disagree about how I'm going to get there, but I'm in number 10. You've conceded the election. What Ed Miliband did was to say, if I had to rely on SNP support, I don't want to become Prime Minister, which is a ludicrous thing for an opposition leader to say. So, if I'd been Labour leader, the right thing to do would be to embrace the changes that were taking place, realise they couldn't be stopped and try and accommodate them to get a progressive coalition in Westminster into power. And that's the difference between my imaginary leadership of the Labour Party at the last election and what actually happened with Ed Miliband.
Right, 0345 6060 973. Actually, I don't know why I'm giving out the number at the moment. We don't have a line free, but we will when we finish with Richard in Edgware. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Alex. Good afternoon to you. I was just wondering how Alex would feel that if we do have a second Scottish referendum, that the rest of the United Kingdom should have a vote as well. Because it's not just about you guys. We should have a say in it as well. And I'm going to be honest with you, Alex, with the greatest respect, I don't know anyone that wants Scotland to stay part of the United Kingdom. Most people I know that if you get England and Wales to vote, you will get your wish. You will be gone.
So, Richard, I must franchise you in order to benefit the case for Scottish independence. That's what you're telling me, yeah?
That's a pretty sorry state of affairs, though, isn't it? When it's got to a stage where, I wouldn't say it was a majority, but a substantial number of people in England actually think England would be better off if Scotland left.
Well, then, if that's what people think, then it's time, obviously, for a parting of the ways and getting a different relationship between equal friends rather than what people have at the present moment. But, can I make the serious point? Because Richard says, why doesn't the whole of the countries of the United Kingdom vote in that? Independence and countries and nations becoming independent has happened many times in a democratic process. Not once have the other countries of the previous union been asked to vote on whether the nation that wants to become independent should become independent. I mean, for example, the Baltic states, when they were under the heel of the Soviet Union, when democracy was starting in the early 1990s, glasnost and perestroika and that sort of stuff, there was actually a suggestion that the whole of the Soviet Union should vote on whether the Baltic states should become independent. But everybody here and everybody around the world laughed at that and said, no. It's the Baltic states who vote. So it's a nation who wants to become independent.
Richard?
So maybe it's time for a change. Because look, it's year 2017. Things have moved on. Things are nothing like they were 50, 60, 100 years ago.
Yeah, well, national self-determination for Richard is kind of on the march. The end of the Second World War, there were about 50 countries in the world. Now I think there's almost 200 in the United Nations. I mean, with 4 times the number of independent countries we did a couple of generations ago. So, the becoming independent is very much the norm in the modern world. I mean, goodness, there's 50 countries become independent from London since the Second World War. And I've met most of the, permanent representatives and the high commissioners of all of these countries, large and small, rich and poor. I'll tell you what, not one of them said they wanted to come back again.
Richard, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, in case you've just tuned in, Alex Salmond will be here for the next 45 minutes taking your calls because it is a momentous week. The Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced that she's going to call for a second referendum. The Scottish Parliament is going to vote on it, I think I'm right in saying next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday, yeah.
So, I mean, this is big news, and it's particularly big news because I think her announcement scuppered Theresa May triggering Article 50 yesterday. All the European heads of government were planning to have a press conference to comment on it, and in the end they couldn't because she's decided to delay it until the 27th of March. So lots to talk about with Alex Salmond. What does he think about how David Davis is performing? I spotted them having a cosy little chat before the debate on Monday. Maybe Alex will tell us what David Davis was saying to him, or maybe not. 0345 6060973. This is LBC with the Alex Salmond phone-in. It's 4:15. Before we go to your calls again, let me read out this question from Graham in Bushy, who's emailed. He says, I know the life expectancy in Scotland is pretty low and that Scotland has one of the highest teenage pregnancy rates in the UK, but surely a generation is more than 5 years. And you can see what he means by that, can't you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's 900 days, just over, since the last Scottish referendum.
Is that a generation?
No, but the point I was going to make, it's 300 days since the Scottish election last year, where Nicola Sturgeon, the new First Minister, the new leader of the SNP, the woman who was resoundingly elected, made a manifesto pledge. We believe the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will.
So that's the material change? That's
the material change. That's the manifesto. And as I said, look, we know this week the cost of political parties not following their manifesto. That's what's happened to the Tories. Therefore, Nicola Sturgeon, and it's total hypocrisy for people who've just been forced to follow their manifesto to complain about a First Minister of Scotland who's following hers.
No, and I take that point, but on the other hand, you've got to say that the polls show that the Scottish people don't want a second referendum.
But that's interesting. You see, the YouGov poll this morning shows exactly the opposite, where that question is asked not in a convoluted way, whether you want one before or after the Brexit negotiations, but whether you just want one or not. There's a majority in favour of a second referendum. And listen, I'll tell you something else. See that majority in favour of a referendum? If Theresa May tries to fiddle with Scottish democracy, it'll soar through the roof.
Well, I think that's right. I don't think she'll have any alternative but to sort of rubber stamp it.
But then, of course, Iain, wait a minute. You said last week, or maybe the week before...
Here we go.
Iain, I mean, I wanted to make you Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and you cannot complain today.
You're not going to demote me,
but you said that Nicola Sturgeon wouldn't have the guts, I think you said, to hold or to call a referendum. And now, well, I mean, I said, well, don't underrate the lady, I said. And now we know what the answer was.
These stories that you forced her into doing this in some way must be true, just to bring shame on me.
No, they're they're nonsense. I'll tell you something else, they're sexist nonsense. I mean, I believe... I was on Good Morning Britain with another well-known television presenter, and he ran this nonsense. And I said, look, you wouldn't have said that if we were talking about a male First Minister. You know, it's this. But behind that question,
well, I think that's not true, because Margaret Thatcher was often accused of being a backseat driver, and that's what effectively you were being accused of.
And of course, that's Nicola Sturgeon's manifesto, Nicola Sturgeon's pledge.
But you must have encouraged her.
I've been saying publicly on this programme, what would happen if the compromise proposals that Nicola Sturgeon was putting forward about keeping Scotland in the single market or the UK in the single market, if they were just ignored, swept aside, treated with dismissed. And I said I thought Nicola Sturgeon would go ahead in that timescale. Now, I've been proved right about that, but it's her decision, her manifesto, her guts, her resolve, and her leadership.
I don't expect you to reveal to me the contents of private conversations, but there's no doubt that you will have talked to her in the week before that announcement. Was it her saying to you, this is what I'm going to do, or did you have a discussion about what the different options might be?
Oh, well, both of that. But I mean, it's basically the first. I mean, Nicola says she's the First Minister. She says what she's determined to do, unless, of course, there was a last-minute concession from the UK government.
And was part of the equation there doing it to deliberately upstage Theresa May?
No, I would imagine. I mean, we don't know if it was Nicola's declaration on Monday that stopped Theresa May on Tuesday.
I think we're all quite sure it did.
We're not absolutely sure about that, but there was widespread speculation that the Brexit vote was going to go through unamended, that was going to be it, and it was clear then that there was to be no concession to Scotland. Once that Brexit letter is signed, sealed and delivered, there is no concession.
To be fair, that's been clear for some weeks, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you'd gone before then, you might have been accused of jumping the gun. Now, look, you asked me earlier about my talks with David Davis, and I've also made it publicly clear that, if the three Brexiteers, ministers, he's the serious politician. He's the one that knows what he's talking about. I mean, if you saw that on Sunday, you had Liam Fox saying, "Oh well, it'd be awful if we're out the single. We don't get a trade agreement. We'll go to world trade terms." You had Boris Johnson say, "Oh no, it'll be all right. It'll be fine." Two different channels at the same time, and you're David Davis making it absolutely clear that the Commons vote that's going to come in 18 months' time or so is going to be either the deal that's arrived at, or the alternative would be world trade terms. So, I mean, he's the serious politician. He's the one worth talking to.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that in a minute, but it's high time we went to your calls. Chris is in Fulham. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Chris.
Right, as the main protagonist for an independent Scotland, and who somebody I believe is definitely pulling Nicola Sturgeon's strings, playing the game to get an independent Scotland and using Brexit to get the second referendum, how can you justify it as an independent Scotland when you're going to be giving more control to Europe than currently you have Westminster? You have a perfectly fine devolved government. Most of the people I know in Scotland want nothing to do with this, and yet you're still pushing your own agenda.
Right, 3 points, Chris. One, you're quite wrong about, Nicola Sturgeon's in charge, and anybody who knows Nicola Sturgeon knows that absolutely, and you should not underrate that First Minister. She's a formidable politician. Secondly, you're quite right, I push for independence, Chris. I mean, that's no secret at all. I'm in favour. And thirdly, I take a different view about independence in Europe. I take the view of most of the rest of Europe. If you're independent in Europe, you control 99% of your money. If you're devolved from the United Kingdom, you control less than 30%. Now, if you're like me and you think that basically independence is about control of your budget, then...
Taking back control, isn't it?
Well,
to coin a phrase.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong. And I was accused by some lunatic liberal last weekend of I had uttered the same phrase as Nigel Farage about taking control or having decisions made in Scotland. That is not a Farageist phrase. That is a sensible phrase that people want the maximum amount of autonomy.
So you completely understand why people voted for Brexit.
Yeah, but yes. And in terms of that wasn't my complaint about the nature. My complaint about the Brexit vote was the poster breaking point and all that sort of stuff. I didn't mind the people like yourself and not to say yourself, but I suspected yourself or David Davis, let's say, who said, "Look, this is a question of where the justice lies, where your last..." I mean, that's a perfectly respectable argument. And to confuse that with racism or whatever is quite wrong, incidentally. People have different motivations.
Chris, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, I can't believe he still says it's for Scotland to take back control. Your judiciary will be overruled. Your trade and commerce will be imposed upon you. And for what? I think it's just for your plan of an independent Scotland and to be a bigger fish in a smaller tank.
He's
right,
absolutely right, isn't it? It's about
no, it's not. But can I
if you want independence, you have to take back control of everything, apart from sort of things that you have to do to, like, on the environment, maybe. Mm-hmm. But I mean, judicial stuff.
Right, okay, let's deal with the judicial stuff. There's two main points of judicial stuff. There's the Luxembourg Court and the Strasbourg Court, right? The Luxembourg Court, most of its business is enforcing the single marketplace. Because if you have a single marketplace and you all agree to abide by the rules of the single marketplace, you have to have a court to enforce it. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You'll find that some countries start to cheat. Who was the Prime Minister who understood that and supported it? Was Margaret Thatcher. That was her project, her idea for the single marketplace, which was a good project and a good idea. The second court is the Strasbourg Court, which has got nothing to do with the European Union, incidentally. It's the European Convention. And that is about some basic human rights that all civilised societies should abide by. Who was the Prime Minister who had most to do with forming the European Convention in the Strasbourg Court? Was Winston Churchill. So the problem with folk like Chris, when they start to say, oh, but these courts are there for a purpose. One, to ensure that the single market is fair and square and ensures prosperity, and the other to ensure that human rights are abided by. And it's not just the human rights here, of course, because you might say, oh, well, we're not going to start having capital punishment and this, that, and the next thing if we didn't have the Strasbourg Court. But the Strasbourg Court now applies to 47 countries. And many of these countries had capital punishment and other infringements of human rights until they had to abide by the European Convention.
Okay, I could argue against you on that, but I'm not going to, because I want to hear from Lorna in Stirling. Hi, Lorna.
Yes, hello, Mr. Salmond. I'm wondering why you're imposing this referendum on the Scottish people, especially when the Prime Minister is dealing with the EU over the Brexit. And I really feel nobody wants it that I've spoken to. I'm quite sure it won't pass.
Well, we'll see, Lorna, when it goes to the Scottish Parliament. But, I did read out the manifesto commitment that was made by Nicola Sturgeon. She was then elected on that manifesto with 47% of the vote. That's the highest vote ever for any First Minister. In fact, I think it's the biggest mandate of any politician just about, certainly in Western Europe. In contrast, David Cameron had a European referendum on 36% of the vote, and nobody's voted for Theresa May at all. So, Laura, Nicola Sturgeon was elected, Laura, on that manifesto. So you can't say that nobody voted for it because they voted for Nicola Sturgeon.
What's the thinking?
But we didn't vote for a second referendum.
No, sorry, Lorna, I read it out. That was the manifesto commitment. We believe the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold a referendum if Scotland is dragged out of the EU against its will.
There is nobody who would have agreed with that.
Well, Lorna, if you remember the last referendum, you remember, the main protagonist here was the Tory party. Well, the Tory party leader was Ruth Davis, and she said, if you vote yes to independence, you'll be taken out of Europe. Now, I know it sounds ironic now, but that was one of her main arguments for voting against. How is it not a big change in circumstances to find that people like yourself in Scotland voted no and found now they've been taken out of Europe anyway?
The fact is, I would never dream of leaving the UK government to replace it with the EU.
Well, then that's a different argument, Lorna. And you, like everybody else in Scotland, this will go to the Scottish Parliament, and it'll be voted on next week, a proportional Parliament. By definition, you can only have a majority for it, and it looks like there's going to be with the SNP and the Greens together.
Yeah, but I thought
it will be because the SNP or the Labour's collapsed.
Yeah.
And it's only being carried because of the Greens.
Yes, but then there's the parties which have the majority in a proportional Parliament representing a majority of the people, Lorna. That's what's called democracy. You can complain if you get...
I'm very annoyed. I'm annoyed because of all my English friends, etc. It's disgraceful, actually.
Yeah, but Lorna, all I'd say to you is, look, opinion polls come and go, and they say various things, and hardly anybody believes them now. There is something else that's done in Scotland. It's been done for the last 20 years called the Social Attitude Survey, and it's not an opinion poll. It's a 1,500 panel who get interviewed in their houses, detailed questions, and it's been the same question every year since 1979 across a range of things. In 2012, and they get a range of options to choose from. In 2012, when I called the last independence referendum, Lorna, the support for independence in the Social Attitude Survey was 23%. This morning, the latest one was published, and this is in a range of options: independence, devolution, abolish the Parliament, etc. It's double that. It's 46%. There is a sea change going on in Scottish opinion. Not yourself, Lorna, but many of your fellow citizens, and perhaps they should get the opportunity to express their view again.
Lorna, thank you very much indeed. We may come on to the timing of the second referendum in a moment, because I think that's actually quite crucial, and that's where Theresa May might well not play ball. 0345 6060 973. Alex Salmond is with me especially this week until 5 p.m. Let's go to Pip in Waltham Cross. We're asking Alex Salmond about his views on the second referendum, on Brexit, and goodness knows what else. 0345 6060 973. Let's get some questions also on what this means for the future of the United Kingdom. I mean, I suppose if Scotland goes independent, there isn't a future for the United Kingdom, but would that encourage Wales and Northern Ireland to follow suit? That's what we discussed yesterday on the programme. Some really interesting calls, especially from Northern Ireland. Pip is in Waltham Cross. Hi, Pip.
Hello, Ian. Hello, Alex. I'd like to ask you both, what, if anything, after the shambolic consequences of Brexit, where we were told that we were racist, pretty much ignorant, and didn't know what we were voting for, why you were rushing straight away into doing this again? And it seems to me, although I'm only English, that it's not about independence. It's actually more of an ego trip. Is this really the best that you can do for Scotland? And wouldn't wiser heads prevail in actually waiting for some sort of thing to deal with instead of, rushing headlong into doing, another referendum, which apparently is only advisory anyway? It's all become a bit pathetic, really. And personally having the greatest privilege of all, which is to represent and fight for the best opportunity for Scotland, wouldn't you be wiser just to hang fire and actually inform your people what the consequences will be, so that they don't have to suffer the ignominy that we've had to do as Brexiteers, being told we're fools? Is this the best for Scotland?
Well, you put it so nicely, but can I just say it's not a question of only being English or just an English person, especially an English person, Pip. Nor have I ever attacked people who voted for Brexit. And I mean, I know you're not saying I did, but in the way you described, because I when as you know, verify. I was openly condemnatory of the Project Fear campaign that was launched by the erstwhile Chancellor during because I recognised it from the Scottish referendum of 2014, and I didn't think that's where the argument should have been pitched for the Remain side.
But do you think it will be again?
Oh, I'm quite certain it will be, and I'm quite certain it will be defeated. And I mean, what Pip says is quite right. I mean, the nature of the Brexit referendum, the whole number of things about it were pretty poor. The timing and various other things in terms of the conduct of the campaign. The very interesting Electoral Reform Society report, which contrasts the 2014 Scottish referendum with the 2016 Brexit referendum, and says in every respect the Scottish referendum, that's the Electoral Reform Society. They've got no dog in the fight. But one thing I would, national self-determination, independence for your country, whether you're for it or against it, it's the noblest cause of all, and has been, through history. And it's not something that people engage in lightly.
Is this an emotional thing for you, as well as, a policy? You actually speak about it in quite an emotional way.
Well, yeah, yes, of course it is. Because, look, I'm an economist, I'm pragmatic, I'm a politician, I want the best for the people. And I'm a politician who doesn't like the prospect of a generation of Tory rule, for example, because that's not the way I see things. But underlying it, that's not why I'm in support of Scottish independence. I think that nations are best governing themselves. I think that's the right thing for nations to do, in cooperation with other nations through institutions like the European Union, but nonetheless are best basically governing themselves. The people who make the best decisions about Scotland are the people of Scotland, and that's the fundamental case for national self-determination, which, is a noble cause. Even if some of the people, myself or whoever, aren't to your liking, it's still a noble cause.
But can you imagine, and you must have thought about this, I suppose, in 2014, what would happen if you won? What would your emotional reaction be? Is it something you just cheer or whatever, or would it be so emotional that you might even have a little tear? No, I asked that because I think
the tears were flowing when we lost. It's quite interesting. I made a resignation speech the day after the referendum. I thought it was the right thing to do, And I managed to deliver the speech. I'm not saying it wasn't without emotion, but I managed to deliver the speech, I think, without a tear, perhaps a slight moist eye. But I've lost count of the number of people who said they burst out crying when they were watching the speech.
Well, I remember seeing that picture on the night when you were driving, I think, from your home or being driven to the airport. You looked a broken man.
Yeah, that picture was a wee bit unfair in the sense, I mean, I'm not, people are entitled to take pictures, but I was actually looking at my iPad. I couldn't get a signal. I was trying that, and it was a reflection of the iPad. But, there's no doubt, listen, making a speech under these circumstances was one of the more challenging speeches I've had to make in my life. And I'm not saying it was without emotion. Clearly, there was a lot of emotion in it. But there's a pretty hard-headed case for Scottish independence, Pip, and I'm quite certain that Nicola Sturgeon will be putting forward that.
Well, let's look at the timing of this,
case.
Because I wonder whether Theresa May is going to say, yep, you can have it, but it'll be after Brexit. Because it's very difficult to, with all the Brexit negotiations which will be going on concurrently, it's a bit unfair, isn't it? Because the government will have its eye off the ball. They're not going to have their eye on the Scottish referendum if it's before Brexit. And so who ultimately controls that?
Well, the expectation is Theresa May is going to try to kick it into touch. I don't think she's going to get away with it, because the logic is all for this taking place at the same time as the House of Commons votes on the Brexit issue. Now, David Davis today in committee, the grown-up politician of the Brexiteers, says he's expecting 18 months of negotiations, and then the matter will be able to come to the House of Commons, either to take it or leave it, as we now know in the vote. Now, let's assume that the 18 months stretches a bit. We know it can't stretch beyond 2 years. So it's either the autumn of next year, or alternatively, the spring of 2019. And when that package, that deal, or no deal, goes to the House of Commons to be voted on, that's when the Scottish people should be voting on either that deal or independence for Scotland.
I would say Theresa May will never agree to that. Just my own view. But also,
then she'll pay the price. And listen, look, I sat with David Cameron once, and he told me there'll never be a Scottish referendum. That's what he told me. And then just a few months later, he said, "Well, there'll have to be a Scottish referendum." So look, when Tory politicians in Downing Street say this is very inconvenient to have a referendum in Scotland, the people of Scotland say, "Wait a minute! If our national parliament decides something and says we want that,
no, fair enough.
Scotland.
Fair
at the end of the day, Iain, Scotland is a country, not a county."
I completely understand that, and I do understand the arguments for independence. I'm not unsympathetic to many of the arguments for independence. However, isn't Nicola Sturgeon missing a trick? Because if she had the patience, if she waited, and I know I'm arguing against what I said a couple of weeks ago, but if she waited until, say, 2021, 2022, and Brexit proved to be a complete and utter disaster for everybody, you'd win by a mile, wouldn't you? Why take the risk of doing it early?
Well, there was another suggestion today in that social attitude survey from this respected psophologist John Curtis, where he said, look, looking at these trends, 74% of young people in favour of independence, she should be waiting a few years till the demographics take over. But I think the answer is this, that the Nicola Sturgeon is somebody who looks at the positive side. And the argument for within the next 2 years is to say that will allow us to have a continuous membership of the European Economic Area, not necessarily the European Union, incidentally. And she's been very, very exact in how she's pitched her tent, Nicola Sturgeon, to say, look, the crucial thing is the European Economic Area in that timescale, and to get continuous membership of that, it would be a huge bonus for Scotland, the Scottish people, and particularly for the Scottish economy, incidentally. Rather than allow, Brexit to go down the drain and to have it in an atmosphere of total crisis, far better to say, look, here's an opportunity for Scotland as opposed to staving off a Brexit British disaster.
Is this an acknowledgement then, for the first time, that Scotland actually won't still be in the European Union? Because we've heard from you, and indeed Nicola Sturgeon, over the last 2 years, that's the vital thing. That's all we've heard since the referendum, that Scotland must remain a member of the European Union. However, this week, of course, it's been made clear by senior officials in the European Commission that if Scotland goes independent, they'll have to reapply just like anybody else would.
Yes, and also commissions in the European Union have said yes, but of course Scotland already has the acquis communautaire, and therefore it would be an easy process for Scotland to have membership.
Well, to be fair, a German Christian Christian Democrat member of the Bundestag said that. It wasn't somebody in the European institutions.
No, it was actually the outgoing representative of the European Commission in London said that a month or so ago.
Yeah, I know, but the person who's actually in charge of this area in the European Commission has said the opposite.
But look, we can swap to and fro's if you like. But I could say, for example, the leader of the Spanish Popular Party in the European Union this week, and we're always told the Spanish are against, made it clear they would not veto a Scottish application for membership.
The Spanish Prime Minister made it clear he would
exactly.
veto
So
it.
what we're going
He's the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I know, but what we're going
So surely his word counts.
All right, okay. And Senior Rajoy, because you were trying to remember his name, Senior
No, I didn't
Senior
know his
Rajoy,
name, actually.
it's well suspected that Senior Rajoy is being engaged in by Theresa May in giving away Scottish fishing rights even before we've reclaimed them. That's the big suspicion, I tell you, in the northeast of Scotland. They're so chummy, Mrs May and Senior Rajoy. Now, look, Iain, over the next wee while, it's going to become clear what the offer is to Scotland. And Nicola Sturgeon's made it clear.
From the British government?
No, I'm coming to this. Nicola Sturgeon's made it clear we want Scotland to be an independent country within the European Union. But let's see what the offer that comes forward is. And if you look at the documents that Nicola Sturgeon has put forward, Scotland's place in Europe, she's put the primacy on the single marketplace, being a member of the European Economic Area.
We've got to go to the travel in a moment, but take this as a scenario. Now, I know politicians don't like dealing with hypotheticals, but I think there's a strong possibility that at some point over the next 18 months, they will agree to some sort of associate membership of the single market where we don't have to accept full freedom of movement. Now, wouldn't that put Nicola Sturgeon in a difficult position? Because it's not membership of the single market, it would be associate membership. Now, you might say, well, that's the same as the European Economic Area, and it might well be similar. But would that be acceptable?
Well, then we'll have the opportunity if that happens, and I don't share your confidence, incidentally, because I think
it's 50-50.
Well, but if it happened, then you'd be able to compare that offer as the United Kingdom against the offer that Scotland gets as being an independent country in a European context. And people will be able to choose what's the better offer.
Incidentally, would you withdraw the referendum if it got to that?
These things are bad for Nicola Sturgeon, but the answer, I think, is no. Once you get the referendum,
the answer is no.
Once you get the referendum process going, there's going to be two offers, Iain.
Yeah.
One offer is Scotland within Europe, and one offer will be whatever deal you get from Britain.
If she says we want a membership of the European Economic Area, and Theresa May negotiates something akin to that with the European Union, then surely you should withdraw from the referendum.
But Iain, we've had a situation for the last 3 months where Nicola Sturgeon has said to Theresa May, look, if the UK has its objective being in the single marketplace in your terms of reference, your Article 50 letter.
But that's why she's jumped the gun.
But no, she hasn't jumped the gun because Theresa May said no. And Theresa May says we're not doing that because it will mean freedom of movement of people.
And she said no as part of, as I think, a negotiating tactic.
Right,
so surely you should wait till the end of the negotiations and then trigger a referendum.
At the end of the 18 months or 2 years, either, as Nicola Sturgeon said, the autumn of next year, the spring of 2019, the choice will be there. It'll be there for the House of Commons, and it should be there for the Scottish people. So in the House of Commons, it will be to either take it or leave it. In Scotland, it will be take it or seize it. And I think we should seize the opportunity.
Crack on with your calls, but first a text from Sam from County Down, who doesn't seem very impressed. He says, love your show, and I'm all for listening to opposing views from my own, but haven't we heard enough from the menace Salmond? Menace, I suppose, is quite mild compared to some of the criticism
surely it's Dennis the menace. That was what they used to call Dennis Law, Dennis the menace. Well, I think Sam will just have to put up with us for a while longer.
Well, only 9 minutes to go. Right, let's go to Nick, who's in Streatham. Hello, Nick.
Hello there, how are you?
Very well. What would you like to say?
I think I'd like to say that it seems to me that, as the United Kingdom, we've achieved amazing things, and more often than not, the Scots have been front and centre of that, and we've all grown and benefited together from those joint endeavours. Brexit showed that we're a country divided. Do you think that now's really the time for us to start going down an avenue where we're becoming more divided and risking all of everything we've achieved so far together?
Yeah, but it's interesting, Nick. The point that you make there about the achievements of the United Kingdom, it's quite interesting. That wasn't the case that was made to Scotland in 2014. Maybe it will be the case that's made this time round. It's a much more positive case, and of course there's a good argument for it. Of course there is. Trouble is that if Theresa May wanted to unite the country, the 52-48%, or the two nations within the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland and Scotland, who voted for Remain, and the two that didn't, England and Wales, then she would have pursued a totally different policy. She would have gone for a totally different kind of Brexit in order to unify opinion, or she would have made a concession to Northern Ireland, a concession to Scotland, and she hasn't done any of these things. So, it's not Nicola Sturgeon who's responsible for not uniting the country. Lastly, I'd say this. It's not just a case, I've said that, you put forward an honourable argument for the United Kingdom as a state, but isn't there a good possibility that a combination of more equal partners with more equal status as independent countries between Scotland and England could have a very cooperative relationship? And maybe that would be a better relationship than the one we've got at the present moment, because countries don't have to be part of the same state to cooperate. Canada doesn't have to be part of America to cooperate with the United States of America. It doesn't have to be a state of the United States to cooperate.
We don't have to be a member of the EU to cooperate with France or Germany.
You would hope so, except, of course, that the early stages, at least, and maybe things will get better. This thing about the European citizens in the UK, I think the government, talking about uniting the country, would have been extremely wise to take a unilateral step and say, look, these people are welcome here, and ask the rest of the countries.
Is that what you were telling David Davis on the floor of the Commons just before the debate when I saw the two of you gossiping?
Well, among other things. David obviously is a loyal member of the government who follows the government line once collective responsibility is agreed. But I've known David for many years as an extremely interesting, liberal-thinking, conservative politician, and I think in his heart that David perhaps would have pursued a different course. But I've no reason for saying that other than his track record as a politician.
Charles is in Dunfermline. Hello, Charles.
Hello there. Good afternoon, Alex and Iain.
Hi, Charles. On you go.
Hiya. Yeah, I've got two quick points or two quick questions, but I'd just like to start by saying, on Alex's reaction to the previous referendum, I think what we thought in Scotland, if Scotland had won, or the Yes campaign had won the referendum, we all thought that Alex would have fell out a pub in the Royal Mile singing Caledonia. Of course, it's not in your nature, but yeah. So I've got two questions. My first question would be to Alex, and I heard a few weeks back regarding currency, and what I would like to see is more information on Scotland creating its own currency and also creating its own central bank. Now, I heard that obviously that would come with a lot of austerity to begin with, but in the long run it would be actually better, possibly having our banks nationalised. Yes, so I would like to,
because it works so well in Greece.
Well, let's come to this. Charles, firstly, I would have stayed in the pub in the Royal Mile till I'd finished Caledonia without any question whatsoever. But I think you'll find the information about the currency options does come forward, not come through the Growth Commission that Nicola Sturgeon has commissioned. We have to say we're in a different situation from 2014, because in 2014, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer said no, or at least ostensibly said no, to the proposal we put forward. Said, look, we're not going to agree to a currency union, which we thought was the best proposal for both countries.
But how can you take back control if you see control of your currency?
I'm coming to that's a separate argument. I think the Growth Commission will have to accept that is still the UK government's position. Now, as was memorably conceded by Alistair Darling during the television debate, of course, nobody can stop Scotland using sterling. Sterling's an internationally tradable currency. You can't stop Scotland using sterling. But, of course, a currency, there's a lot of attractions in developing a range of currency options. Denmark has its own currency. The other countries, Sweden, for example, has its own currency. Iceland has its own currency. And they've stood it in good stead, and they're linked to either pegged to a currency or freely floating. So I think what you'll find over the next few weeks, the information that you're looking for, Charles, will come forward. And I suspect you'll find within that some pretty satisfactory answers to the questions you have.
It's fantasy to suggest that Scotland could maintain its own currency, isn't it? Because the massive budget deficit there is in Scotland would mean that it would be on a loser from the start.
Well, can I tell you something, Iain? Firstly, we don't know what the budget position of independent Scotland is quite different from the GERS calculations that are made. Why? Because within that GERS calculations, there's things like our share of Trident, there's things like our share of HS2, which clearly an independent Scotland wouldn't be having. So let's say that. But secondly, even if you accepted the GERS figures, it would still be less than the UK budget deficit was in 2010. And plenty of countries have grown their way out of budget deficits if they've got the right economic
but Scotland
policies.
hasn't over the last few years in terms of GDP.
No, the fundamental control and levers of the Scottish economy now are run from the Chancellor by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in London. No gainsaying that. Some of the micro stuff, some of the stuff on labour, on child care and various things that the Scottish economy has done, and particularly inward investment, has had very, very good results in Scotland.
So you definitely believe that Scotland could maintain its own currency?
It could maintain its own currency, yes.
Should?
Well, that will find out what the
I'm
Growth
asking
Commission...
your opinion.
Yeah, well, I'm going to wait and react to what the Growth Commission's got to say.
Quick call from Jason in Chelsea. Hello, Jason.
Hi, yes. I just wanted to know if you did have a referendum and you lost the game, would that mean that Nicola Sturgeon would have to step down and fall on a sword?
You set the precedent, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I can envisage that Nicola Sturgeon's not contemplating defeat.
But if she did?
Then, I think it's a very... You asked earlier about hypothetical questions. I speculate all the time, but I try and speculate on success, not failure.
No, indeed.
I'm sure Nicola Sturgeon's doing.
I understand that, but I mean, there would be a lot of pressure on her, wouldn't there? In that scenario?
Basically, you've got the answer. I think she's... Look, I went into a referendum process, as was said, and on the social attitude survey figures at 23%, on that figure. She's starting a referendum process at 46%. Without assuming anything and without being big-headed about it, she's in a very, very good position to anticipate victory.
And what role would you play in the campaign?
Whatever role I'm asked to play. I saw a quote from an outstanding young member of Parliament, Mary Black, saying she'd do whatever she was asked in the campaign and put forward a range of options. So I'll do whatever I'm asked to do, whatever the range of options are. Although the pubs in the Royal Mile that was being referred to, I'm not so sure about that, Sam.
Right, very, very quick final question from David in Crawford John. I've never heard of that, but it is in Scotland. Hello, David.
Hiya. I was just wanting to ask Alex if you can explain to me, because it strikes me that Theresa May is giving us a massive contradiction. On one hand, she's saying that if Scotland leaves its biggest trading partner, it's going to be a massive disaster. But on the other hand, she's telling the whole of the UK that we should leave the biggest trading partner and it will be a massive success. Makes no sense to me.
We should get you into the House of Commons, David. That's a splendid point. It's a huge contradiction. I mean, this whole nonsense about customs posts and the tweed that the Tories have been running, simultaneously, incidentally, to saying it's going to be a frictionless border in the Foyle in Northern Ireland. So, David, you've put your finger on it. You don't have to be in the same country to trade. The point about being in the single marketplace is you're free of all the special regulations that countries used to introduce to stop your products. That's why the single marketplace is the place to be. And anybody who thinks that trade between Scotland and England is going to be hindered by independence needs their head zipped up the back.
What's the one word, finally, what's the one word you'd use to describe the Chancellor's U-turn on national insurance contributions?
Handbrake turn, the humiliation, and Iain Dale for Chief Secretary to the Treasury.
That's quite more than one word.
Good word.
Final text from Malcolm. As son and grandson of a Scottish National MP at Westminster, what a ragbag. Wishart and Tasmina, very excitable. Pompous Robertson, not the Scots I knew.
Oh, but at least I haven't been mentioned in that litany.
Indeed. On that note, we have to end the hour. Alex, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you.